Use Ajax, the foaming cleanser.
Alka-Seltzer, plop, plop, fizz, fizz. Oh, what a relief it is.
Double your pleasure, double your fun with double mint gum.
J-E-L-L. Oh, the big red letters stand for the Jello family.
Hi, I'm Dan Thomas, and this is Common Point, a show for and about communications. And we're going to be talking with John Ellsworth, our special guest today. John is the director of the Vintage Radio and Communications Museum of Connecticut. That's a mouthful. That's in Windsor. And John is also the founder. John, welcome. You've been a guest on this show before.
Yep. Thanks, Dan.
Welcome back. First of all, let's give it a little history about you and how the Vintage Communications Museum started.
Well, my favorite line about the museum when I talk to new people is that it is a hobby that got totally out of control. And it gets a good chuckle. But yeah, I was an electronics teacher in high school and liked antiques, so the two kind of came together and I started collecting old radios. And before you knew it, I had a couple hundred of them around the house. And so my wife and I started to share them with the public, because when people came over to our house, they were in awe of all this stuff. And I said, well, this might be cool to put out there. So we did some displays at library showcases and so forth, and people loved it. And so we decided to give a museum a try and started with a little hole in the wall in New Britain back in 1990. And we've been through 6 different locations and gotten up to a building that we now own that's 18,000 square feet of space. And it just keeps going. It's all volunteer driven, and it just amazes me every time I stop and think about it.
Well, it's become my second home, especially if you ask my wife.
Yes.
Because I do spend a lot of time there, and it's a great place. Yep. And it's growing and constantly changing. If someone has visited the museum, you might note that the museum's exhibits, they change. We change items, and we change the way things work, and it's in constant flux.
I think a lot of people's visions of museums are sleepy old places, and we are far from it. There are things going on constantly. We're constantly working to improve with our volunteers to change the way we present to the public and improve the way we present to the public. Items come in all the time through donation, and that's what makes it a lot of fun for the volunteers. We say every day is Christmas there, because you never know what has walked in the door and been donated, and we have some high quality, very unusual pieces that have come in recently that go immediately on display. So it's neat.
Give us an idea of what you'll see when you go to the museum.
What we've done, thanks to one of our volunteers, Bernie Michaels, he thought that the best way to present what we have is a timeline, a chronology. Over the years, the museum has collected much more than radios. It's become an all-communications museum. We have radio, television, motion picture projection, telegraph, teletype, telephone, instrumentation. It goes on and on. So we realized we are a comprehensive communications museum. And Bernie came up with the idea of putting it into a chronology. So as you come in and take the tour through our display, you start back in the 1800s and then see how things develop all the way up to the 1970s and 80s.
Well, it's a fun tour, and people are amazed when they come in and how complete and how large it is. I know that. And also they're amazed that this is not something you come in and spend 10, 15 minutes.
Nope.
A real tour can take a couple of hours.
Right. One of the unique things we do at the museum is we do give personal tours. We have 6 or 7 of our volunteers who are very, very good at telling the history of the communications. And so we offer a personal tour to everybody that walks in the door. Most people coming in the door expect to spend 20 minutes and be out of there. And when we reach the halfway point in the tour, and we've been at it for an hour and a half, going on 2, and we end up on a rug to give their feet a little rest, they're just amazed that so much is there, and they're always so thankful when they walk out, and shaking our hands and loving what they just saw and what they learned.
Well, it is a fun place, and again, we remind visitors that this is hands-on in a lot of cases. We demonstrate these items work. The telegraphs work. The wonderful Tesla coils work, and will be demonstrated. And the stereos work. All of this is, and even some of the newer displays in the computer area. So, and it can be interactive.
Yep. Yeah, that's one of the other things that makes us unique, I think, from most other museums. Most museums have security systems in front of their displays, and if you get too close, alarms go off and the whole bit. We are far from that. We do encourage people to interact with things that are there because that's the way communications equipment was set up. It was the old radios were furniture that you were made to interact with. And so we will demonstrate the more sensitive things. Our guides will demonstrate that. Other things that will encourage the guests to go hands-on and play with the volume and listen to the sound coming through the string phone and the whole bit. Yep.
And I might add that we also have a fairly large display of amateur radio equipment, plus a complete, active, working ham shack for all you amateurs. NC1J, by the way, I'm a ham. And W1VCM is our call at the museum, if you ever hear that. We have operators. You're invited, if you're a ham, to come and operate. Bring your license. That's all we ask, just a copy of your license. And you can sit down and operate. And we're pretty proud of that. And that is actually a group within a group. Most everyone that is part of the ham club is a member of the museum, but it's not mandatory. But,
right. Well, I kind of look at the development of the museum like a tree, and it started off as a stem of radio collecting, and then once the museum started going, we had this group of amateur radio operators that were there, and of course Gordon Horn then initiated our station, and so we now have a subgroup within the museum that is a amateur radio club with a working radio station there. There's many different things that have happened that have branched off of the museum. Our educational piece with classes on crystal radio building, and it just keeps growing. It's really neat.
We might mention too that we need funds. In other words, we can't operate in a vacuum. So there are memberships, and you can always join the museum. That's not a problem. Right. Talk about that a little bit.
Well, we quite often have financial types come through and visit the museum, and they always ask somewhere along through the tour, well, how do you guys do this? With a inquisitive look on their face. And I love it because I wait for that question to come, and I said, there's no federal funding, there's no grants, there's nothing. It is all self-supporting. I said, it's all run by volunteers. And we have many little avenues of revenue that keep us afloat and help us to buy the building and keep everything up and running. And it can be memberships. People can take out memberships to help support us. We do get donations at times of financial donations. We run a very large eBay business, which you're a key part of, in terms of we get so many items donated to the museum that we just can't keep it all. So we evaluate everything that comes in. If it enhances the story of the history of the museum, we keep it in the collection. If we have another one like it, we keep the best and we will sell the other. If it's something that doesn't help enhance the story of the history of communications, we sell it. And we have items up on eBay weekly, usually basically 52 weeks a year. And we've sold to people all over the world, to every continent except the Antarctica. And it is a worldwide business, and people are just stunned when they hear that, but we have outreach throughout the world. And the same thing with the guests that come in. Quite often we have people from faraway places, and I think in most cases we have more visitors from outside Connecticut than we do from inside Connecticut.
And the museum has a good reputation as well. We are members of organizations that involve museums throughout the country, and we also work with other museums.
Yes. There's a national museum down in Washington, D.C., and quite often they have overstock of items, and they offer it up to other museums, and so we've had some trades with them back and forth. Yeah, it is kind of fun, though. I joined several of the museum organizations, and most museums are run on grants and are constantly worrying about where their next dollar is coming from, where their next grant is coming from. And the way we're structured is just totally different, and we just can't relate to that. And they look at us weird when we tell them, no, we don't go looking for grants. They say, what?
No.
But it works. It's been working for 29 years. So.
And we all have fun. That's the other thing. If you're part of it, it's fun.
Right. That's the thing I learned as it went along, and I ran this volunteer organization, and more volunteers came on board. Is totally different. I was a department chairman in my regular job, and I had to manage people, but it's totally different managing people with a volunteer organization, and it comes down to a 3-letter word, simply fun. If volunteers come in and want to do something, quite often a new volunteer will come in and they'll say, well, what do you want me to do? And I'll turn the question right back around to them and say, what do you want to do? Because if I give them something they don't like, they don't come back the next week.
Right.
So I let people migrate, and it's really cool to see it happen, because I have guys that love vacuum tubes. We have a beautiful vacuum tube display because of it.
Wow.
And we have guys that love computers, and we have a beautiful computer display because of it. They migrate to the different areas, Victrolas especially. We have a group of guys that are Victrola guys, and they love it. So that's the way to manage it. It's simply a 3-letter word. If they're having fun, they'll be back. If they're not, you better change something, make it fun.
And we do get some rather interesting donations, as you mentioned. One of the more interesting recent donations was a Klystron.
Yep.
The Klystron was donated by Joe DiMaggio, chief engineer. I think he's officially retired, and he's back to work again at NBC 30.
Yes.
And this was actually part of the original transmitter. This was the output stage.
Yes.
It's not small. It weighs over 2,000 pounds. The tube alone weighs over 480 pounds, according to John, or to Joe, who was talking about it the other day. And it's something to see, and it's on display. So big and small. That was one of the more interesting deliveries as well when they brought it in.
Well, that kind of aligns with some of the projects that we have going on and have had going on for a while. One of them that you're kind of a pioneer for is a transmitter alley, which we hope to open up in the near future. We have collected about 6 different transmitters, commercial transmitters from different radio stations around the area. Some of them very early, some of them very historic, and we're working to open a space where people will be able to walk through and see the equipment that actually puts the signal out to their radio. Most average people don't get to see that type of equipment, and we have quite a collection of it, and we want to open it up to the public. We're working on a new library, and we have a librarian who is cataloging everything and trying to put it all on a software database. But we physically moved it to a new location in the building to open up a space for a multi-purpose room. One of the things we have not had there over the years is a place for a large group to assemble. People have come and wanted to put on talks or do demonstrations. We just haven't had the facilities for it. So we're working towards that. So that's another piece that is, so we always have many ongoing projects that we're working on.
Well, you mentioned the library, and I've had people say, oh, you've got a few books. No, this is a library. We have a complete SAMs, a complete writers, almost complete, and these are available to people that need to look up the schematic. If you're working on an antique radio, we probably have the information for it. That's why the library is there. Plus, we have a lot of historic items as well, and a huge reference section. So it's not just a bookshelf. It's a fairly large library.
And until Ann gets done with the inventory, we won't know how many volumes we have. But yeah, it is a really neat resource, and it does run the gamut from highly technical manuals down to, we have a collection of Radio Boys, Radio Girls, which are fun juvenile readers that were written back in the 1920s when radio was a new big thing. and they're just like the Hardy Boys. They're a mystery story, but in the mystery, when solving the mystery, they use their radio to solve the problem.
And along with that, John, we also have crystal classes, so that's your specialty.
Yes, yeah. Most people don't realize how easy it is to pick up radio signals out of the air. It is extremely simple, and in a matter of about an hour and a half to hour and 45 minutes, we can build a radio from scratch that actually works. We'll take it in the studio and we'll wire it up to an antenna and we'll actually test it. We have many groups come through. I've done radio building with kids from age 5 all the way up to age 95. Most of them are younger kids. We get a lot of scouting groups coming in, homeschooling groups coming in, and the kids are just amazed at how this thing works. They're doubting Thomases until we hitch it up and they hear that first sound coming through the earphone. They go, wow, this is cool.
And you would think in this day and age of cell phones and rapid communications, but still, they made this themselves.
Well, that's the cool thing about the class, is that the concept that is shown, and I'm a former public school teacher, and I give these kids, no matter how young, as much theory and background and education as I can in the process. And what I try to get them to understand is everything that runs wirelessly runs on the exact same principle. And of course, everything today is wireless, from their garage door openers to their cell phones. So it should give them a much better understanding of this wireless world that they live in today.
I'd like to talk a minute. We hit on donations, but we do accept donations. What are we looking for?
People always ask us that, and it's so hard to determine what we are looking for, but people just bring things in randomly, and some really amazing pieces have come in, especially recently.
Yes.
But it's pretty much, their grandmother or grandfather's old radio that has more sentimental value to the family than real physical value. And as soon as they find out there's a museum that they can give it to, that's kind of exciting. But we have kind of reached the limit. We have over 7,000 square feet of space that is storage, stacked up to the ceiling. And so everything that is offered to us, we have to put a caveat on. We may not accept it. Big consoles, unless it's an exceptionally rare and unusual console, the consoles just take up too much space. But when people offer items to us, we ask them to send us pictures and model numbers. We'll evaluate and sit down as a committee and discuss them and decide whether we need them in the collection. We also do not promise people that we're going to keep them in the collection, because we may turn around and sell them or use them to improve another one that we have that's a little bit better.
And we've had, as you say, some unusual donations. Certainly a Klystron was an unusual donation. We've also had some very nice high-end audio equipment that we have on display that works. It's kind of one of the areas that I love. And some broadcast gear. I just finished my little project, which is a broadcast studio that we have. And we're going to have a good display of reel-to-reel machines, which were the backbone of broadcasting, starting really in the 40s and on up. So there's a lot of areas, but we, again, don't say, oh, well, I've got that, you may not want it. Check with us, and we may know someone or a member that may want it as well.
The way we look at it is, if most people that approach us, they're cleaning out an ancestor's house, and if we don't take it, they're going to throw it in the dump. So in many cases, if it's something that's really nice but we don't really need, we quite often can network with somebody else that would like it, and we can pass it on that way, and it gets preserved. Whether we end up with it or somebody else ends up with it, it's very nicely preserved.
And we are a source, you mentioned vacuum tubes briefly, and we have a few, about 100,000?
My guesstimate is 100,000, who knows. But we have a huge warehouse of vacuum tubes. A lot of people are out there trying to restore old radios, and they need the vacuum tubes, and it is a pure profit for the museum. We sell them at a discount, so I encourage people to come to us, and we probably have just about one of every vacuum tube on earth in there.
Right. Yeah, I mean, there's some very rare audio tubes
Yep.
that are going to cost more. Some we may not have, but
Right.
for the most part, if you're doing a restoration, we will have vacuum tubes for it.
Yep.
And we have one volunteer who is working tirelessly to go through them and test them.
Yep.
And with that number of tubes, and then we have more coming to the door practically
That's
every
huge.
week.
Yeah.
So he's actually treading water at this point in time.
But in the warehouse, we actually have the ones that we've organized are in alphanumeric order. So that means that if somebody comes in asking for a tube, it's just like going down the grocery store and pulling it off the shelf. We know exactly where to find it and if we have it or not. So
Something else that we added along with that is we added a workshop, and this is primarily for members to work on projects. A lot of the radios that come in, of course, don't work, and the rare ones, or the ones we want to put on display, need to be repaired and operational if
Right.
possible. So we have volunteers that are doing that, and we put together a workshop about 2 years ago now. We started that.
Yep.
And stocking it with test equipment.
Yep.
It looks like a disaster area, but believe it or not, it works.
That's because it gets well used.
Yes,
Yeah.
it is well
Yeah.
used.
Yeah.
Well, what are the future plans, John? What are we looking at?
Well, as I said, we're trying to expand the display into the transmitter alley, the new library. The multi-purpose room is going to give us a whole new aspect of being able to have even entertainment. We did a number of years ago, had a concert there, and the band was set up kind of amongst the displays, and everybody in the room couldn't see the band because they were all stuck in the displays. So we could do that. We could have lectures. We could have, I know one fellow around, Terry Barton, does the Magic Lantern Show, which was the technology that was around just before motion picture. And he does a wonderful show. And we have no venue for him. He's come to us several times and said, can I do a show? Can I do a show? When we can only sit 20 people, and if he charges us anything, it's not profitable. But what we're shooting for is having a 50-seat auditorium that can then be converted into a space for our swap meets. We do swap meets 5 times a year where guys from collectors from all over the Northeast come in and sell, swap, and trade what they've got. And we also put surplus material out from the museum. And we run 2 of them in the wintertime, one in December and one in February. And it's cold outside.
Yes.
You know, usually it's a tailgate affair for the April, the June, and September one. But the indoor ones, it would be nice to have a big space that we could set up tables and everybody be in the same room. That's some of the things we're working towards. So
Now, as far as volunteers, we are in specific need of a volunteer right now. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, yeah, volunteering in general, I think a lot of people are intimidated. But they have to realize if they're interested in getting involved and understand it's a great organization. We have a great group of people, and we have a ball when we're there. People quite often ask me what's the best, most valuable asset of the museum, and most people think I'm going to say the collection. But actually, the most valuable asset to the museum are the people that we have there that make it all happen. The collection wouldn't be anything if we didn't have people that can show it and display it and set it up and move it and the whole thing. That's the strength is in 2 different areas. And the people are so important, and you don't need any skills. We have people that work what we say behind the wall. We have the rear storage area, and constantly looking for people to help organize and move and that kind of stuff. You don't need any skills. If there are people that do have skills in the communications area, we have tons of work for them. Because there's so many different things that we can do. So.
Just in restoration of part of the collection. We really don't keep up with that. We have to pick and choose all the time because there's so many people that have so much free time to do it. I know that we have had some very special additions to the collection. I'm thinking of the jukeboxes as well right now. That, we're going to do a show, by the way, on that specific topic. But if you are interested and you have a skill, even if you don't think we can use it, we probably can.
Oh yes, yeah. Well, we're losing our bookkeeper right now because there is a ton of paperwork that comes together for bills and so forth. and he's moving over to Germany for a couple of years, so we are looking to fill that position. We have a display of early computer equipment, and we'd love to have somebody to come in and champion that area and get it all up and running so people can interact and be playing games of Pong and Lunar Lander and everything else and have a lot of fun there. So there's needs all over the place, though. It's just anywhere. If you're interested in getting involved in a great group and you got some time on a Saturday or even Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, the days that we're open, come on down and we'll show you what we do. And if you like it, you can stay.
And we've had some young people get involved as well, and I think that's very important, because we need to pass this along.
Right.
I'm getting kind of long in the tooth. I don't know how much longer I'm going to do this.
Yeah.
So we need young people, and we have a few young people that have gotten involved and are very involved.
Yes, we do. And it's kind of exciting to see the younger generation and their fascination with the older technology. And we have several that are in their teens still that come on a regular basis and work on learning how to repair radios. I have a son that has grown up now, but he grew up in the museum. I birthed the museum before he was born, so he spent his whole life in the museum. And he's an engineer for Toyota now, and I credit a lot of his knowledge came from being at the museum, rubbing shoulders with engineers and people that had a huge education in communications and passed it on to him, basically.
Right. Yeah. And we love to do that. And as I say, I've seen groups of young people come in, teenagers, some high school kids. One day came in, and I thought, you know, you're always saying, oh, they're probably going to be here 10 minutes and say, oh, I'm going to go back to my iPhone and my computer. But that is not what happened. They were fascinated. They are asking questions. They want to know the history. They stayed for like 2.5, 3 hours just having a great amount of fun.
Most memorable time I remember with kids, we had a group come in, inner city group from, I think it was Hartford that came in. And they were actually scary looking to a lot of the volunteers. And I said, no, this is cool. We took them around. They were fascinated. They finally got to the studio and they saw all the microphones, and they picked up the microphones. They started rapping into the microphones. They made up a whole ad lib rap about their experiences at the museum, and they were having a ball. It was cool.
And again, we do have an active recording studio as well. And we do offer a service that if you have old recordings, now we can't do copyrighted material and copy it for you.
Right.
But if you have, we had one gentleman that had come in with music that his mother had recorded. She was a singer many, many years before, and we were able to put that on CD for them. We do offer those services.
It's very touching. Years ago, before you were involved with the museum, years ago I had a lady come in with a bunch of wire recordings, and they were recordings of her singing at about 8 years old with her father. And her father passed away when she was 10, and he was the only one who knew how to run the wire recorders, and she was probably in her late 50s. She brought these in, and I transcribed them for her. And she came back the next week, and I played one back, and she broke down and started crying. She says, first time in 50 years I've heard my father's voice. So it's very touching what we can do.
It's a very emotional thing for a lot of people. And again, it's something that we can do. We're running out of time, John. I'd like to thank you certainly for being here and remind everybody that the Vintage Radio and Communications Museum of Connecticut is located in Windsor at 115 Pearson Lane. We are open Thursdays and Fridays from 10 until 3. And we are open Saturdays from, technically from 10 to 5.
10 to 5 for the public.
But and then Sundays our hours are 1 to 4.
Sundays.
And please come by if you have an opportunity and visit us. Would love to have you and become a volunteer. If you're interested, it's a great place to go and just have fun.
Good place for them to check us out is on our website. It is our initials, vrcmct.org.
I'd like to thank our special guest, John Ellsworth, for being part of our program today and talking about the museum. We'll be looking forward to all those new items coming up. For Common Point, I'm Dan Thomas. Thank you for watching.
Pepsi Cola, it's the spot. 12 full ounces, that's a lot. Twice as much to do. Pepsi Cola is the drink for you. Nickel, 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 nickel. Pepsi Cola hits the spot. 12 full ounces, that's a lot. Twice as much for a nickel too. Pepsi Cola is the drink for you.
Funding for Simsbury Community Television is provided in part by contributions from viewers like you. Thank you.